The day my son-in-law borrowed my name to close a deal, he thought I'd never notice. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things, actually, but that one cost him the most. I've been a careful man my whole life. Not cautious out of fear, careful the way a surgeon is careful, or a man who's watched enough people ruin themselves with one loose word, to know that most damage is self-inflicted and entirely avoidable if you just slow down before you speak. People confuse careful with weak. They usually figure out the difference at the worst possible moment for them. My name is Walter Reece. I'm 64 years old, and I live by myself in a brick ranch house on Colby Lane in a town outside Richmond, Virginia, the kind of place where the mail carrier waves and everybody's grass gets cut on Saturday mornings whether it needs it or not. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, mostly commercial buildings, parking decks, retail centers, a couple of hospital wings, before I retired 3 years ago. My name is stamped on the permit filings of half the buildings in 3 counties. That's not bragging. That's just what 31 years of not cutting corners gets you. A name people trust without having to think twice about it. My daughter Renee is 31. She married a man named Dean Sabatini about 4 years back, a residential contractor who does kitchen remodels and the occasional spec house. Dean's a good-looking man, quick with a joke, quicker with a handshake, the kind of grip that lasts half a second too long, like he's checking to see if you'll flinch first. I never flinched. I also never fully trusted him, and I want to be honest, that's partly on me, because I never told Renee that. I told myself I was being a good father-in-law. Looking back, I think I was just being a coward about a conversation I didn't want to have. It was Father's Day, the 3rd Sunday in June. I drove out to their place on Larchmont Terrace, one of those new-build farmhouses with the black windows and the barn doors that don't slide open because they're just for show. I'd helped them with the down payment. Nobody brought that up anymore either. I carried a gift bag up the walk, a first edition Civil War history book I'd tracked down for Renee, since she'd gotten into that after her master's program, the kind of gift that means somebody actually listened to you at some point in the last year. Renee opened the door before I could ring the bell. Dad. She hugged me, the careful way. The managed way. She'd been doing that for close to 2 years, and I'd been pretending not to notice for just as long. Dean came around the corner in a golf polo, tucked in, sleeves nowhere near rolled up because Dean doesn't do manual labor anymore, not since the business took off, in his words. Walter, he shook my hand. Firm. A little too firm, a little too long, like he needed me to feel it. Dinner was in their dining room, the one with the chandelier they'd argued about for 6 weeks according to Renee, the one they used for company because eating there every night would apparently ruin the effect. Renee had made pork tenderloin, my favorite. I noticed that. I notice most things. It's an old habit from 31 years of reading blueprints for the mistake nobody else caught yet. About 20 minutes in, Dean started circling something. He does this, eases into a subject like he's walking a customer through a change order he knows they won't like, softening them up with small talk first. So, I don't know how much Renee's told you, he said, cutting into his pork with more concentration than pork requires, but we just landed something big, real big. She mentioned you were bidding on something, I said. Bidding undersells it, Walter. He set his fork down like the conversation had earned a pause. Riverbend Commons. You know that development off Route 60? 42 townhomes. Full build-out. This is the kind of contract that changes what Sabatini construction is. Renee beamed at him. It was the same look she used to give me when she brought home a report card, and something about seeing it aimed at somebody else still catches me sideways, even now. That's a serious jump, I said, keeping my voice level. How'd a residential remodeler get a general contract that size? Something flickered behind his eyes. Quick, gone, before most people would have caught it. Relationships, he said, easy as anything. You put in the years, Walter, you build the right connections, doors open. I picked up my water glass and took a slow drink, because I already knew exactly which door had opened and whose name had been used to prop it. Here's what nobody at that table knew yet. 2.5 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from Marcus Feld, an old colleague of mine, a structural review consultant I'd worked alongside for almost 20 years before I retired. Marcus called because my name had crossed his desk on a bid package for a development review board listed as the structural consultant of record for Sabatini construction on the Riverbend Commons project. I had never agreed to that. Nobody had asked me. Marcus figured I'd simply forgotten to mention it, the way you forget you agreed to something small. He congratulated me. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat at my own kitchen table for a good 15 minutes, doing absolutely nothing but breathing. The way you do when you're deciding whether to be angry or to be smart, because in my experience you rarely get to be both at the same time and do it well. Dean had used my name, my license, my 31 years to make a residential remodeling outfit look like it had the structural backing to handle a 42-unit commercial build. Without a phone call, without a signature, without a single word to me. I didn't call him. I didn't call Renee. I made my decision quietly, the way I make every decision that matters, and I waited for Father's Day, because some things deserve to be said to a man's face, at a table, in front of the people who need to hear it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded packet of paper. Dean, I said, I need to ask you about something. He looked at the papers before I'd even unfolded them, and his jaw did something small and involuntary. What's that? Renee asked, glancing between us. It's the structural consultant page from the Riverbend Commons bid submission, I said, smoothing it flat on the tablecloth, turning it so he could read his own paperwork. My name's on it. Licensed engineer of record. Nobody said anything. It's a specific kind of quiet, that one, the kind where you can hear the air conditioning cycle on. I never agreed to this, I said. Nobody asked me. I found out because Marcus Feld called to congratulate me on a project I'd never heard of. Dean set his fork down. Walter, look, it's more complicated than it. I'm not finished. First time in longer than I could remember that I'd said that at somebody else's table. I want my name pulled from every page of that submission. Today, if the board's still in session, Monday morning at the absolute latest. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath through his nose, the kind of breath a man takes when he's buying time to recalculate. Then he looked at Renee, and that's when I watched the whole thing shift. Watched him make the choice a coward makes when he's cornered reach for the person standing next to him instead of the truth in front of him. Renee, he said, and his voice went soft, wounded. Your father's trying to pull the rug out from under us. On Father's Day. That's not what's happening, I started. He worked 8 months on this, Renee said, her voice climbing. 8 months, Dad, and you're going to blow it up over paperwork? He used my license without permission. That's not paperwork, Renee, that's fraud, and it's got my name attached to it. It's a formality. She stood up out of her chair. It is not a formality if I never signed it. She had her mother's eyes when she got like this wide, certain, absolutely convinced she was standing on solid ground. You want to do this? Fine. Here's where we are, Dad. You apologize to Dean, right now, at this table. You tell him you're behind us. Or you can leave, and don't bother coming back for a while. Because I'm not choosing between my husband and your ego. The room went still in a way that had weight to it. I looked at my daughter, the girl I'd taught to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac on Colby Lane, the one I'd sat up with through 2 bouts of pneumonia, the one I'd walked down an aisle 3 years ago, and shook this man's hand, and told myself I'd give him a fair shot, and I saw something I'd been avoiding seeing for 2 years. She wasn't caught in the middle. She'd already picked a side, and it wasn't a side that had room for me on it. Dean's smirk was small and satisfied. The look of a man who's watched somebody fold 99 times and is fully expecting fold number 100. I stood up slow, looked my daughter in the eye. 6 words. Quiet. Even. Final. Watch what happens now, Renee. I picked up my jacket off the back of the chair and walked out the front door without looking back. They thought I was leaving in shame. They thought I'd go home and lick my wounds and call in a week begging to make it right. They had no idea I was going home to make 1 phone call and that it would only take about 11 minutes. I got home at 7:12 in the evening. I know because I looked at the clock over my stove the second I walked in, the way you do when something has just ended and some part of your brain wants a timestamp on it. I set my keys on the counter, didn't turn on the television, didn't call anybody, and sat at my kitchen table and let the last 2 hours settle over me. 64 years old. I'd raised that girl alone, the last 6 years of her childhood after her mother passed, driven her to swim practice before sunrise, sat through every parent-teacher conference by myself, Worked every overtime hour I could stand so she could go to the college she wanted without loans hanging over her, and she'd stood in her own dining room and told me not to bother coming back. I sat there a long while, maybe 30 minutes, and somewhere in that stretch of quiet, something that had been wound tight in my chest for 2 solid years just let go. Not snapped, released, slow, like setting down something you'd carried so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your own body. I slept better that night than I had in longer than I could remember. That still surprises me some when I think back on it. Sunday, I let pass quietly. Mowed the lawn even though it didn't need it, sat on the back steps with a glass of tea, called Marcus Feld not about the bid package, just to ask after his wife's knee surgery. Marcus asked if everything was all right. Better than fine, actually, I told him. He laughed. Walter Reece, you sound like a man who made up his mind about something. I did, I said. About 2 years too late. Monday morning I put on a collared shirt and my good shoes, not because I was going anywhere, but because some phone calls deserve to be made standing up straight in a pressed shirt, even if nobody's there to see it. I had one call to make. His name was Harlan Ott, 70 years old, chairman of the County Development Review Board, a man I'd known since 1994, when we'd both sat on a building code advisory committee for 3 straight years, and never once disagreed on anything that mattered. He'd spoken at my retirement dinner. He'd sent flowers when my wife passed. Harlan Ott was the kind of man who'd built a 40-year reputation in this county on never once having his word questioned, which meant he understood exactly what it cost to have somebody try to spend yours without asking. I dialed his office at 8:50. He picked up on the second ring. Walter. Warm, genuine, the way he always was. Tell me you're not calling to come out of retirement on me. Not quite, I said. Harlan, I need about 10 minutes, and I need you to actually hear this, because I should have called you the day I found out. There was a pause, and when he spoke again the warmth was still there, but something underneath it had sharpened. Go ahead. I told him everything. Plain, in order. No dressing it up, no letting my temper into it. I told him my name and license number appeared on the Riverbend Commons Structural Review as consultant of record. I told him I'd never been contacted, never consulted, never asked for authorization of any kind. I told him I had no professional relationship whatsoever with Sabatini Construction and couldn't vouch for a single beam calculation in that submission. Then I told him the part that mattered most. Harlan, I've known you 30 years. My license means something or it doesn't, and I'm not going to let somebody borrow it to get a contract past a review board I never signed off on. Silence on the line. Not an uncomfortable silence, a working one. Walter. His voice had gone quiet, measured. The voice of a man who's just understood the full shape of something. You willing to put that in writing? I'll have a signed statement on your desk by noon. All right. Another pause. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm not angry, Harlan. I just need my name off it. We hung up. I stood in my kitchen a moment. 31 years of professional standing, and it took 11 minutes on the phone to set it straight. I typed the statement myself, drove it to the county building before 11, handed it to a clerk who read my name off the letterhead, and looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. We'll get this to the board today, Mr. Reece. I want to tell you I went home feeling like a man who'd won something. That's not what happened. I went home and sat with the grief of it instead. Because here's the thing nobody warns you about: finally putting down a weight you've been carrying too long. It doesn't just float away. It falls, and things underneath it get crushed along with it. And one of the things underneath it, in my case, was the picture I'd been keeping in my head for years of my daughter and me being all right. Of having come through her mother's death and her 20s and everything else with something real still standing between us. I let myself feel that Monday evening, the whole weight of it, no shortcuts. Tuesday, I got up and moved forward. I want to be clear about something. I didn't engineer what came next. I made one phone call and filed one statement. I didn't reach out to Dean's clients, didn't call his subcontractors, didn't post a word about it anywhere. I told the truth to one man with the authority to act on it, and the dominoes went down entirely on their own. By Tuesday afternoon, Marcus told me he'd heard it through his own channels in the review community, that the county board had suspended the Riverbend Commons application pending a full audit of the structural documentation. Their compliance office had been looped in automatically the moment a licensed engineer of record disputed his own listing. That's not a discretionary thing. That's a switch that flips itself. They didn't just pull the bid. They flagged the file, which meant Dean Sabatini's name was now attached to a documented instance of misrepresenting a licensed professional on a public development submission. And in a construction and development community the size of ours, where every general contractor, every sub, every zoning clerk knows every other one by first name, that kind of flag doesn't stay quiet for long. It travels the way bad news always does in a small trade. By Tuesday evening, two subcontractors Dean had lined up for the framing and electrical had gone silent. No returned calls, no emails answered. The professional version of a door shutting softly in your face. Marcus called me Tuesday night. "Walter, I don't know exactly what you said to Harlan, but I just told him the truth." He let out a slow breath. Well, the truth had somewhere to be, apparently. Wednesday morning my phone started up. First call came at 7:40. "Dean." I watched it ring out. Let it go to voicemail. Not yet. He called again at 8:05, then 8:35, then sent a text. "Walter, we need to talk. This is getting way out of hand. There's been a misunderstanding. Call me back." Misunderstanding. An interesting word choice from a man who typed my license number into a public document without asking. I didn't answer. At 9:20, Renee called. I looked at her name on the screen a long moment. My daughter. The one who'd told me not to bother coming back 3 days earlier. I let it ring out too. She needed to arrive at this on her own, not because I'd walked her there by picking up the phone. That's the thing about the truth. If you hand it to somebody, they can reject the delivery. But if they trip over it themselves, alone in their own kitchen, while their husband's making his 15th panicked phone call of the morning, it sticks in a different place. It sticks to the bone. What I learned later, from Renee herself, in a conversation I'll carry with me the rest of my life, was what had happened inside that farmhouse on Larchmont Terrace Wednesday morning. Dean had come home Tuesday night already unraveling. The silence from his subcontractors had rattled him in a way Renee said she'd genuinely never seen before. He'd been on the phone past midnight. By Wednesday morning, he'd gotten the formal notice from the board. The bid was dead, the flag was permanent, and the two subs had made it clear, quietly and professionally, that they were done. And that's when Dean stopped performing. The charm went first, then the composure, then whatever careful architecture he'd built around himself in that house came apart at the seams, and what was underneath wasn't the confident, ambitious man Renee thought she'd married. It was somebody smaller, meaner, and cornered. He turned on her, the way cornered men do, blamed her, blamed me, said things I won't repeat because they aren't mine to repeat, but which made it plain exactly what Renee had been to him in all of this. A signature. That's all. A signature with my name attached to it. By Wednesday afternoon, Renee was alone in that house, her husband having stormed off somewhere, sitting with her phone in her hand, looking at my number. 3 days after Father's Day, near enough exactly. She thought my silence was punishment. It wasn't. It was the first time in her adult life I'd let her stand in front of a consequence without me stepping in front of her to take it instead. And I won't pretend it didn't cost me something. There's a particular kind of knock you feel before you hear it. Not loud, not angry, desperate. I was out back Wednesday afternoon, just past 3, pulling crabgrass out of the bed along my fence line, the kind of slow work that keeps your hands busy while your head does what it needs to do on its own schedule. My phone had been face down on the porch rail since noon. I wasn't hiding from it. I just wasn't available to it. There's a difference, even if most people never bother learning it. I heard the knock from the yard. 3 raps, careful, almost apologetic. I knew who it was before I got to the door. I pulled off my gloves, walked through the house, looked through the narrow window beside the front door. Renee, standing on my porch on Colby Lane in a wrinkled cotton dress, the pale green one she'd had since college, the one she wore when she wasn't trying to impress a soul. Her hair wasn't done. No makeup. Eyes red in a way that told me she hadn't just started crying, she'd been at it for hours. 31 years old. And for just a second on that porch, she looked about 9 to me again, standing outside my old apartment the first weekend after her mother and I separated, before she passed, back when Renee still carried that stuffed rabbit everywhere and was trying so hard to be brave about it. I opened the door. She looked at me, her chin trembling once before she got it under control. "Dad?" Her voice was barely holding. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd sat Sunday night, and felt everything rearrange itself inside me. I put the kettle on without being asked. Renee's drunk tea when something's wrong since she was about 13. I set the mug down, sat across from her, and waited. He's not, she started, stopped. Dean's not who she pressed her lips together hard. I don't know how to say this. Take your time. He screamed at me. Dad. Her eyes came up, raw, unguarded. Not raised his voice. Screamed. Like I was the reason all of it fell apart. She laughed, but there wasn't any humor anywhere in it. Like I was supposed to apologize because his fraud got caught. I kept my face steady, let her land it herself. He said, she paused, something moving across her face, shame maybe, mixed with the particular kind of horror that shows up when the truth arrives about 2 years too late. He said the only reason he ever needed me was because of your name, your license. That without your reputation on that paperwork, the board never would have even looked at his bid. She looked at me. He said it like it was my fault. Like I hadn't delivered you properly. Delivered. Like I was a package somebody could borrow without asking and hand back a little dented. Renee, you tried to tell me this at dinner. Her voice cracked. You weren't attacking him. You were just telling the truth. And She stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth a second. I gave you an ultimatum, Dad. On Father's Day. I told you not to bother coming back, and you said 6 words and walked out. Yeah, she exhaled, shaky. Yeah, you did. She wrapped both hands around the mug, staring into it like the answer was in there somewhere. I've been doing that to you my whole life, haven't I? Every time something got uncomfortable, every time I didn't want to hear it, I made you choose between telling me the truth and losing me, and you always chose me. She looked up. I called that love. It wasn't fair. It was never fair to you. There it was. The thing I'd been waiting years to hear. Not because I needed it for myself. I'd stopped needing that somewhere around 60, but because she needed to be the one to say it out loud, for her own sake. No, I said carefully. It wasn't fair. She blinked. I think she'd expected something softer out of me. I love you, I said. I have loved you every single day of your life, including Sunday, and Monday, and today. That was never in question, and it never will be. I leaned forward a little, but I made a mistake, Renee, and I made it for a long time. Every single time you threatened to pull away from me, I folded. I told myself I was protecting you. What I was actually doing was teaching you that my own boundaries didn't hold any weight, that if you pushed hard enough, I'd always move. She went very still. Dean learned that same lesson somewhere, I said, probably from watching the two of us. That landed. I watched it land. She didn't flinch from it, which told me she'd already been sitting with some version of that thought before she'd ever knocked on my door. So what do I do? She asked, and her voice was small in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. It was the smallness of somebody standing in the wreckage of their own life, asking a question they genuinely didn't have the answer to yet. That's not mine to answer, I said. That one's yours. My phone buzzed on the counter. We both looked at it. Dean Sabatini, her jaw tightened. He's been calling you all day. I know. You gonna answer? I watched the screen until it went quiet. No. She almost smiled. Almost. 3 minutes later, a voicemail notification came through. I didn't reach for it, but Renee glanced at the phone and said, Quiet. He called me 40 times between last night and this morning. The last few, he wasn't even asking me anything anymore. Just talking. About everything he'd sacrificed. How everybody was against him. How I owed him. She shook her head slow. I've heard him sell himself before. I'd never watched him beg. It's a different animal entirely. People show you exactly who they are, I said, the moment the performance gets too expensive to keep up. She looked at me across the table, my daughter, 31, sitting in the same chair she'd sat in as a teenager on the nights we'd eat cereal for supper and watch old westerns because neither one of us had the energy to try any harder than that. I'm sorry, Dad. Not performed, not managed, plain. The way an apology sounds when it actually costs the person saying it something real. I'm so sorry for what I said at that table, and for a lot of what came before it, too. I reached across and put my hand over hers. I know. We sat like that a while. Then I got up and put the kettle back on. Dean called twice more that evening. The second one, he left a voicemail, 3.5 minutes long. I know because I played it later, alone, after Renee had gone home. He opened with justifications, worked his way through explanations, and landed somewhere in the neighborhood of an apology, though it was the kind of apology that's really just a request wearing a nice shirt. He needed me to call Harlan Ott, needed me to explain there'd been a mix-up, needed me to vouch, one more time, for a man of integrity who'd simply moved a little too fast in his eagerness. 3.5 minutes, a man of integrity, from a voicemail left by somebody who'd forged a professional's license onto a public bid document. I deleted it. I've thought a good deal, since, about what mercy actually looks like at 64. When you're younger, you think mercy means softness. You think forgiveness means unlocking every door you ever closed. You think love means absorbing whatever gets thrown at you and coming back around smiling anyway. I don't believe that anymore. Renee came back 2 days later. We talked longer that time, harder in a few places. She'd already spoken with an attorney. She was asking the right kinds of questions, making the hard decisions herself, and doing it without handing me the weight of any of it to carry for her. That was the thing that told me she was going to be all right. I told her she could call me any time, day or night, for anything real. What I didn't say out loud, because it didn't need saying, was that the door she thought she'd shut on Father's Day had never actually locked, not once, because I'm her father, and that part of it isn't up for negotiation, not ever. But the version of me that used to fold every single time she pushed that man retired for good somewhere between that dinner table and the drive home. Dean called one final time Thursday morning, just past 7, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I looked at the screen, sent it to voicemail, made my eggs, and sat out back watching a pair of cardinals work over the feeder while I read the paper front to back the way I like to. Some men beg loudly, I've come to think, because they've spent their whole lives mistaking somebody else's quiet for weakness. They never do figure out, not until it's far too late for them, that the quiet ones were the only ones who ever really knew what they were holding the whole time.